Good. Hello, hello. Good afternoon. We'll get started, and people might be moseying in as we get going here. Good afternoon, and welcome to the 15th Annual Lutheran Studies Conference. Faith and religion, yay! Faith and religion in the military and medicine, soul care, and interfaith relations. My name is Merritt Trelstad, and I'm the University Chair of Lutheran Studies here at PLU and a professor of religion. And I would like to thank, even at the outset, all of the people listed on the program who have been an enormous help in bringing this day and making it possible for us. This conference gives us a view of soul care and interfaith relations from the front lines in the experience and work of chaplains. Indeed, military and medical care are critical sites for interfaith and spiritual care within hospitals and in the field. And today you're invited to learn more about the challenges, questions, and insights that come with the ways chaplains serve people from all backgrounds and build bridges across differences in very challenging contexts. Even before getting started, I must admit that I have much to learn from our chaplains here today. My parents and grandparents served their communities as farmers and pastors for generations. While they certainly participated in soul care, it's only in my extended family that's deeply connected to the military. And I have much to learn then about the work of all the chaplains who are here today, and I'm humbled and grateful for your presence. Religion and medical care and religion in the military share two common points that I would like to quickly explore in these introductory remarks. First, both medical and military have a complicated relationship with religion and faith traditions. Second, they both demand a level of deep interfaith engagement with diverse religions that's far more extensive than most of us encounter regularly. Both medical care and the military share deep connections with religion historically. They hold hands easily at some points, and at other points they stand in tension or even opposition. Since it's my area of study, I'll be primarily using examples here from the Western Christian tradition with a spotlight on the Lutheran tradition, especially for my students here today, to illustrate the easy and tricky parts of these relationships. From its very beginning, the Christian community followed Jesus' example and emphasized health care and healing. Several scholars in the field of religion have noted that Christianity's success is at least partly due to its shocking commitment to care for those who were sick with diseases that were feared the most, such as leprosy. Restoring people to community and care had an enormous impact on their healing. Likewise, in the 16th century, Martin Luther urged pastors not to flee from the plague, but to use the best of science to heal and care for the sick. His works were actually quoted around the time of COVID-19 as well. Christians were not alone in these commitments, however. The world of modern medicine is deeply indebted to the medieval medical advances and discoveries of Islamic scientists and physicians. Their advances hundreds of years ago in diagnosis and treatment have shaped today's hospitals and current medical practices. Even today, Catholic, Lutheran, and other faith-based organizations provide what some have termed an invisible social safety net in health, social, and emotional care for our country. More than 26% of all health care in the United States, that's almost 30%, is provided by Catholic hospitals and clinics. In the map pictured, you can see the darker the red, the higher the percentage of health care offered by Catholic church-affiliated networks. In some states, it's over 45%, and in Washington itself, it's over 30%. Even thinking of Tacoma's own hospitals and trying to list them in your head if you're from here, illustrates this point well with the expansion and the everywhereness of the Franciscan health system. Catholic and other faith-based organizations also provide over 80% of health care in underserved parts of the world, such as in Africa. Beyond this, Catholic social services and Lutheran social services together provide a large percentage of social service agency work across the entire country. Jesse the Body Ventura, while governor of Minnesota, commented that organized religion is a sham and a crutch for weak-minded people. But apparently, it's a necessary crutch. Our government and social welfare and support could not survive without the foundational work of organizations like these. And yet there's also a tricky side to this as well. Made clear in the federal overturn of Roe versus Wade, abortion and reproductive health, as well as trans-affirming health care, have become largely dependent on faith directives of particular religious groups, leaving many in our country without access to care or patient choice regarding their own health and bodies. We're still living into what all this means and how medical service is proscribed by faith directives. Religion and the military have a similar relationship of tension and cooperation, and our chaplains know this well. Let me provide one example. I worked as a youth director in a church where every Sunday there was a bit of a flag parade. A congregation member would find the United States flag and march it up to the front of the church. And the pastor, right before the church service started, would go up to the front of the church, take the flag down the aisle, and put it in the Boy Scout room, again, where it usually lived. The pastor wrote letters to the congregation trying to explain that Christians belong to a global body of Christ as a church. Nationalism and the cross cannot be together during worship because this was a sacred space that transcended our allegiance to nation. This was a very common stance of churches in the 1960s and 70s as well, and it's a very long-standing conversation in Christian churches, both past and present. There's a strong case to be made that early Christians were by and large pacifists, understanding that Jesus' commandments to love one's enemy and the 10 commandments of thou shalt not kill, the one commandment there, led naturally to nonviolence. By the 3rd century, there were some Christians who served in the Roman military, but it was rather rare. When the Roman Emperor Constantine won the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which this is supposed to be depicting, under the sign of the cross, or technically the Chi Rho, he declared Christianity to be a legal religion within Roman territories and called the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to systematize and unify Christian doctrines, leading it to become a religion of the Roman Empire. It has been popular in the last couple of decades of scholarships to basically blame Constantine for wrecking Christianity. There's a lot of books on this. You can take a look for yourself. Making it a tool of empire is the claim, and government. Early Christian theologians, however, such as St. Augustine in the 4th century, argued that Christians should avoid war, but that it might be necessary to curb evil. The father of Roman Catholic theology, Thomas Aquinas, wrote in the 12th and 13th centuries and set a basis for further Christian refinement of just war theory. He compiled the scholarships of others before him and argued that all peaceful approaches had to be exhausted before considering violence, and then those need to be evaluated in terms of just intent, just cause, and also commensurate levels of violence. In the 16th century, Martin Luther had a squirrely relation to government and the use of violence, and that is the technical term, squirrely. Luther's theological ideas challenged hierarchical systems of government and church, and in a time when the church and state were corrupt and twisted together, he began to propose that the temporal world of government and the spiritual realm of God needed to be considered separately, even if both were ultimately under the authority of Christ. He wrote To the Christian Nobility of the German Nation, in which he discusses secular powers and its relation to God's authority, building on the early basis of Christian just war theory and in response to the emperor and princes in their support or their threats against the early Protestant movement. He also wrote On Temporal Authority, to what extent it should be obeyed, in 1523. Here he claims that the government is needed to provide order in a corrupt world. And so this is his kind of language. He says, so Christians may in good conscience serve the sword enthusiastically without danger to their soul. He even makes the example of executioners swinging their swords with verve, really. And yet violence or the sword, he says, may only be used for the good of the neighbor. Christians must disobey summons to war or violence when it's grounded in greed, self-interest, or economic gain, whether that is individual or national. But this went quite wrong for Luther when he advised the peasants to restrain, the princes to restrain the peasants who were revolting in Germany in 1524 and 25. The German peasants were among the first to try to unlock the revolutionary potential of the Reformation teachings and to fight social and economic justice. As their rebellion led to overthrowing political powers and killing leaders, Luther sanctioned the use of violence to put down the, quote, murderous hordes of peasants, words that fueled up to slaying up to 100,000 people. Luther was horrified, actually, at the scale and extent of the massacre by the royalty. Going much further on, based in Christian pacifism, we can see other Protestant groups in Luther's times took a very different approach from Luther. The Radical Reformation understood the Bible to only support pacifism and never violence. It was one of 4 different reformations of the time. From that Reformation movement, we get today's denominations of Christian pacifists, such as the Mennonite, the Church of the Brethren, the Amish, and more. Based in Christian pacifism, we can see an example in Julia Ward Howe's work, and she is the poet and author of the hymn, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. But she also wrote the original Mother's Day Proclamation in 1870, calling for global disarmament. Perhaps you didn't know that this is what you're celebrating at brunch in May. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is a whole different character in the Lutheran tradition. Luther's legacy remained complicated even into the last century. Nazi Germany was predominantly Lutheran. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, like Martin Luther, John Calvin, and many others, disappointed his parents by becoming a theologian. Bonhoeffer had a twin sister, and she had to flee Germany because she had married a man with Jewish ancestry. After Bonhoeffer became a theologian, he traveled here to the United States and became acquainted with both the pacifist movement and the social gospel movement in New York. He himself became a pacifist and corresponded with Gandhi, planning to visit him and work together. He was moved by the Christians in the United States who opposed racism and decided that he should address the same elements in his own homeland of Germany. He gave inspiring sermons and speeches over the radio about Christian ethical duty in the face of the rising Third Reich. One such talk was cut off midstream in 1933 after Adolf Hitler became the chancellor. He famously wrote, "We are not to simply bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice. We are to drive a spoke in the wheel itself." Some 80% of the Christian church in Germany followed along with the Nazi Party, creating haunting images today of banners that hold both the cross and the swastika. By 1940, some 95% of Christian Lutheran churches had caved, and only 5% remained in opposition to the Nazis, working to transfer Jews and others to safety. Bonhoeffer himself started an illegal seminary to train pastors and theologians for resisting, and he called this the confessing church, as they called themselves. Bonhoeffer and his in-laws were part of an elaborate attempt to assassinate Hitler, planting a bomb under his desk, but this failed when Hitler stepped away as it detonated. Bonhoeffer wrote that he thought such an act was a sin. It was wrong to kill, and he expected to be held accountable for it by God, and yet he still chose to do it after careful consideration. He never justified the attempt to kill Hitler as right, and for this I admire him. He also loved his homeland and was rather socially conservative, prone to support government and his beloved fatherland at all costs, so it was very difficult for him to act against it. He and several family members were all arrested when their names were found in an archive folder documenting the resistance movement. They were all executed shortly before the end of the war. Bonhoeffer himself was hanged at Flossenburg concentration camp, only months before the end of the war and the Allies came. The main theological idea that defined him in his understanding was Christ the center, a way of life and discipleship that supersedes all other bids for authority. Another Lutheran, Dorothea Zola, also adopted and preached pacifism. She grew up in World War II Germany and was a feminist Lutheran liberation theologian who remained a critic of national and international governments who participated in economic oppression. She wrote, "Death is what takes place within us when we look upon others not as a gift, blessing, or stimulus, but as a threat, danger, and competition. Whereas resurrection," she writes, "occurs within the context of history as we bring about an end to oppression and transform these social structures that are its cause." My last example of Lutheran struggles and with the sword and how it should be used in Luther's kind of language is found in the 1970s and 80s Namibia. Here it was common for Lutheran churches to lead the fight for freedom in Namibia's struggle for independence. Some Lutherans embraced only peaceful resistance, while others took up arms against the South African government that ruled them since the end of World War II. Apartheid was an institution in Namibia, and it was implemented in 1962 when all non-white Namibians were split into homelands and within each individual town with individual sets of rights. In 1971, the International Court of Justice ruled that the South African occupation of Namibia was illegal. Immediately after, 2 black Lutheran churches responded with an open letter. In the letter to the Prime Minister of South Africa, the black bishops and pastors asserted that they would no longer stand for the abuses of apartheid based on biblical witnesses that all humans were created in the image of God and that God was for freedom of slaves throughout in the Hebrew Bible. The churches provided space, organization, and support for Namibians to fight apartheid, but the government responded harshly by bombing the church headquarters and arresting or detaining key church leaders. Although many Namibian Lutherans did not use Luther's writings, comparisons were made by them between the apartheid state and the Nazi government, and some Namibians used Dietrich Bonhoeffer's language with the call for a politically active confessing church. One major Lutheran leader pictured here, Abasai Shejavali, Bishop Shejavali, wrote, "God is a liberator. God is not for oppression, exploitation, or human rights violations." Leaving this historical analysis, I would like to point to another very different angle of the relationship of military and religion as it's been explored in the field of pastoral counseling. I'm sure that our chaplains can say a lot more about this and probably will today. Moral injury is used as a term. It was new to me. This is why I'm explaining this years ago. Moral injury is a term that's used to address the personal and spiritual impact of carrying out actions that do not align with one's deepest convictions. This may arise in war or in other ethical contexts, and soul care or repair require attention and healing from moral injury. So throughout our time, I think with our military chaplains, I believe we'll hear more on this kind of a topic, and maybe also in healthcare. This brings me to my second and last point of connection between medicine, military, and religion. While many people assume that a religious leader's job is to convert or convince others to their particular form of faith, both medical and military chaplains vow to do the opposite. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I find that very interesting. They necessarily support and minister to people in the faith language and symbols of the other person's tradition. In a polarized society, how many of us have this skill anymore. To be able to meet our neighbors on their grounds rather than our own, to listen and uphold them in their struggles and joys. Chaplaincy lies at the heart of this interfaith work in a pluralistic society. What is interfaith? Here's one definition. Sorry, it's not so bright. I'll read it out loud for you. One definition of interfaith is the action of bringing together people of different religions, spiritual expressions, and indigenous traditions. It's about understanding our significant differences, recognizing our similarities, and working together for peace and justice and healing in our world. Interfaith assumes that one holds one's own tradition dearly as their foundation and root, but is open to relationships of learning and engagement with those of other religions or secular traditions. Founded in 1890, I always have to talk about PLU here. Founded in 1890, PLU deeply engages its foundation in the Lutheran tradition in its 21st century context. As is the case of other institutions of Lutheran higher education, our Lutheran identity is rooted and open, which means we draw from and lift up key Lutheran values while also supporting all students, faculty, staff, alumni, families, and beyond in their living out their core values and commitments, whether they stem from Lutheranism, Judaism, Buddhism, humanism, Islam, Hinduism, paganism, or other traditions. The university, like the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or the ELCA, with which PLU is affiliated, strives to be both Lutheran and interreligious, embodying this open and rooted stance in ways that build bridges, deep connections, and spur collective action toward a more compassionate and understanding world. The ELCA, the church body itself, shares this approach as seen in several interfaith statements, including a declaration of the ELCA to the Jewish community, a declaration of interreligious commitments, a policy statement of the ELCA, ELCA guidelines for ministry in a multi-religious world, and a declaration of the ELCA to the Muslim community. While repudiating Luther's vile anti-Judaic and anti-Muslim diatribes, these declarations and statements affirm commitments to grow in hospitality, openness, and service to people of other faith traditions. The ELCA 2020 ministry guidelines state, "In a deeply divided world, and as a faithful response to Christ's message of reconciliation, we seek right, peaceful, and just relationships with all our neighbors, including those of other religions and worldviews. We do this as an expression of our Christian faith and as a continuation of the covenant God made with us in holy baptism to serve all people, following the example of Jesus, and to strive for justice and peace in all the earth." There is far more that could be said on the interfaith path of the ELCA, but we're actually going to turn now to the experts and welcome our panel for this afternoon, those who exemplify this commitment to spiritual care in an interfaith context. Thank you. And would you please join me in giving a warm welcome to our panel members? And from there, I'll introduce them after they assemble. Come on up, please. I'll try to introduce them in order, but they might give you a little hand to say, yeah, that's me, as I'm talking about them. Panelists, feel free to sit down and we'll share mics as we need to here. To my left here, I'll introduce Chaplain Dr. Eric Hammerstrom from PLU. He has a deep affinity with Buddhism since he was young and spent his entire adult life in this study. At PLU, he teaches a variety of classes that touch on Buddhism in some way, including courses on the history of religions of East Asia and Asian American immigration history. He has also undergone extensive training as an interfaith hospital chaplain. Minda Lane, 2 over, serves as the staff chaplain of Virginia Mason Medical Center, a 325-bed hospital in Seattle, Washington. She's passionate about expanding care recipients' concept of spirituality in support of their greater fulfillment. Edison Darasme is a therapist. I should have chaplain in front of each of these. Excuse me. They are all chaplains. Chaplain Darasme is a therapist and chaplain who supports children, families, and communities in navigating grief, trauma, and change. He works as a pediatric chaplain at Seattle Children's Hospital and sees clients in private practice at Mend Seattle. Edison's approach is grounded in mindfulness, curiosity, and a commitment to creating space for people to feel seen and supported. Chaplain Brown, on the end, is a native of Detroit, Michigan, and on August 2000, she began her military career as second lieutenant chaplain candidate. She's endorsed by the National Baptist Convention and was accessioned, am I pronouncing that right? All right, to active duty. I practiced it, but I wasn't sure. To active duty on the 15th of May in 2005. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Virginia State University. I was picking these things out for you all, especially the students, just to hear people's academic, like their major. If they went to college, what their major was, I think it might be interesting. So political science from Virginia State University, Petersburg, Virginia, and a Master of Divinity degree from Hood Theological Seminary in Salisbury, North Carolina. A master's degree in family life and counseling from Webster University, and as is seen in our bio on the website, Colonel Brown's service and military honors are extensive, and she brings a wealth of experience to us this evening and afternoon. Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Kirsten Hedlund joined the Army through ROTC in 1999. She commissioned as an intelligence officer for a short time before she transferred to the Chaplain Corps in 2005. She planned to serve as a civilian pastor after completing her military obligation, but instead was thrilled to find an opportunity to combine her military and ministry vocations in the Chaplain Corps. Her civilian education includes a Master of Divinity from Trinity Theological Seminary, a Master of Theology from the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, and she's completing her PhD in theology at the Lutheran School of Theology with her defense on November 6th. November 6th. Join me in giving them a warm welcome.
Thank you, Merritt. Thank you, everybody. So as the representative from PLU on the panel, I'll be kind of leading. So the goal here is just to have a panel where we can share the pretty broad experiences here on the panel. I appreciate you introduced me as a chaplain, but I'm not a chaplain. I'm trained as a chaplain, but I'm not currently working as one. And I want to make that particularly clear because the two folks sitting next to me, I was a student alongside them. They are now chaplains. I'm just trained as a chaplain. But working with college students is definitely part of that. It adds to that abilities that we need to work with people. So I just have a couple questions, and you can grab mics and answer the questions. Looking at the time, we're going till 5 o'clock, so I want to make sure there's a little time at the end for the audience to ask all of us questions, especially based on, people will have curiosities, I think, about what we say. But the first thing I want to start with is something that a lot of people may be curious about. Merritt kind of mentioned it, but what do you do as a chaplain? That's the first question. What do you do as a chaplain? Are there misconceptions people have? And how does interfaith work? How is the interfaith component of that part of what you do? So that's the question. What do you do as a chaplain?
So I'll speak on behalf of myself, but Chaplain Brown as well, and ma'am, I won't steal your thunder or anything like that. But we serve in the Army, and I know part of this panel is a focus on medical ministry. And as Army chaplains, we actually have opportunity not only to serve units of all different kinds, but we also have opportunities to serve in military hospital chaplains, military hospitals as chaplains. And Chaplain Brown and I both have had the opportunity to serve in military hospitals. Some of those hospitals are hard structure hospitals, and some of those hospitals are not hard structures. I served in the 330th Medical Brigade, and that unit had to set up hospitals out of tents, over 300-bed hospitals with ICU, surgical wards, different types of wards, within less than 72 hours, so that all of the facilities would be ready for people who were in combat that didn't have the ability to get to a hard structure hospital.
So what do you do? No, follow up. And this is for all the rest of folks. Like, what do you do when you're chaplaining?
A lot of different things, as I'm sure the others have experienced as well. But we provide for the free exercise of religion. We nurture people who are in need of care. We care for soldiers, for families, sometimes even for the larger community. As military chaplains, we kind of have a mantra that we nurture the living, we care for the wounded, and we honor the dead. And we do that in many different ways. Sometimes it's walking through hospital wards and caring for people who are in need, and sometimes it's in other settings as well.
And to piggyback on that, as hospital chaplains, we had to learn. I know when I came through, it was, I don't want to go date my age so you guys know how long ago it was. But to be honest with you, our training was done in hospitals where you dealt with not just military people, but civilian. Especially if like BAMSI, we call it BAMSI, which is in San Antonio. We're dealing with the military as well as civilian. And so you're in a trauma hospital, you know, where they come through motorcycle accident, anything across the board, and you're there as a chaplain providing that care and giving that love and that attention. Even going on the burn wards and going on wards where people lose their child at stillbirth. So your ministry is across the board, whether it's in a military setting or a civilian setting. And as a chaplain, you have to be there to meet that family when they're going through things. And for me in that training, it was hard, but it was challenging because you do cross the different religions and denomination. And sometimes they may say, okay, I don't want a woman chaplain, go send me a priest, go give me this, give me that. You're there to take care of them. So it's not anything that I ever took personal. It's just making sure I took care of the needs of that family when they were hurting. And if they allowed me to be there and I was blessed to be there, then I gave them the ultimate possible care as a chaplain, as a woman of God, to make sure that those individuals was taken care of, whether they lost a child, whether or not someone had a head injury from a motorcycle accident, or just anything across the board. It's being there with them in that moment as a person, as a chaplain, and respecting whatever their wishes are at that time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Minda Lane. I studied community health. I have a bachelor's.
As your major?
As my major. That was my major. I went to Western Washington University, in case anyone was curious about that. My background is, my path to chaplaincy is less conventional. I don't have a Master's of Divinity. It's more rooted in psychology and philosophy than theology, which I find actually comes in handy in the interfaith context, because I think of it really as that my role is to enter a room with no agenda but to offer presence and companionship, witnessing. A lot of folks have the conception that what a chaplain does is pray with people. I do that. I grew up Presbyterian and then sought a more evangelical expression for worship that spoke more to my heart. But it's not the first thing that I'm thinking about when I walk into the room. What I'm thinking about is, where is this person today? What's hardest for them about being here? Are they approaching the end of their life? Am I companioning family members who are approaching the end of their loved one's life? Maybe it's checking in with staff. How are they doing? The ICU is at a really high census. There's new surgery patients that are coming. They're overwhelmed. They're understaffed. Checking in with them and just hearing them. So much of what I do is witnessing. We call it often a ministry of presence, which feels very relevant. Certainly there are sort of less, people think prayer, end of life, accompanying people at death, but there are also rituals, maybe grief rituals or rituals of remembrance. I am trained as a Reiki master, so I often will offer Reiki. I sometimes will engage music. I have a little panda drum that I'll bring that seems to be really helpful for patients that are in pain. So if they're awake and alert enough that they can engage and have a conversation, maybe they might like to just play a drum. So interventions can be across the board, but are much broader, inclusive of, but also more broad than prayer, reading scripture, and accompanying people at the end of life, those are the things that people typically think of when they hear chaplaincy.
Thanks, Minda, for addressing, I guess, some of the myths that are commonly held about what we do. I'll add a little bit from the perspective as a pediatric chaplain, a little bit of what I do. I'll first start by defining spirituality, because I think that gives a lot of context for the work that we do. So I define spirituality as the means through which people make meaning and make sense of the world around them, usually tied to values, beliefs, upbringing, and can be expressed in a number of different ways. And so I always like to say that everybody is spiritual, whether they're connected to it or not, and some choose to be religious. And so in a pediatric setting, well, just really in the hospital in general, being there directly challenges people's meaning-making system, right, existing in that space. And so that's kind of the space that I exist in, is when I enter the room, I'm looking for themes of how is this challenging space, right, challenging your meaning-making system? Where are the areas and themes of spiritual distress? It could be around their connectedness to themselves, their relationship to themselves. It could be their relationship to others. It could be hopelessness or despair. It could be a number of different things. And in a pediatric setting especially, I'm always dealing with the family unit, right? It's the caregivers and it's the child. And my work is centered on the child, but the child comes as a family unit. So I'm always also looking at family dynamics. And so I'll give you a couple examples of what this can look like. A couple weeks ago, I walk into one of my sickle cell patients. I walk into the room. They were there by themselves. I think they're probably about 14, 15. And first time meeting them, very closed off. I never worked with spiritual care before. And so I said, hi, my name's Eddie. I'm one of the chaplains here. I'm not someone that deals with what's going on with you medically. I'm more someone that checks in with things on the inside, like feelings, hopes, fears, and things that help you through tough times. Would you mind if I sat with you for a couple minutes? And he's like, sure. Not saying a lot. And I noticed that he had been playing Madden. He had his PS5 out. He was playing Madden. I said, mind if I hop in? And he's like, sure. And so we're playing Madden NFL. And next thing you know, as we're playing, he starts telling me about all the things that this disease has stolen from him. And he's like, you know, I don't really like talking about my feelings and whatnot. And I think that therapists are dumb. He didn't know that I was also a therapist. And I'm like, yeah, you know, like, therapists can be pretty dumb. And so, and next thing you know, right, he's expressing everything that this disease has taken from him and we're bonding over this game. So that's one example. A couple days ago, I was meeting with a 9-year-old on our mental health unit, and I have these picture cards that I like to use, and they love creating stories with them. And so we've been creating these stories together, and it's amazing to see like the themes of how they are processing that experience come through in the stories that they share. And so I connect with kids a lot through play. So I get to play a lot for work, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, that's kind of a glimpse of what I do.
I mean, I think I appreciate all of you talking about the range of things that you chaplains are called to do. And I think one thing maybe that people are thinking here is it sounds like tough work. And I think it is. So I worked at a hospital. I worked at St. Joe's for a year alongside chaplains Eddie and Minda, full-time seeing patients. So I'm curious, or I think given the theme of this conference today, I'm curious to hear a little bit more. I think Chaplain Colonel Brown, you started talking about being blessed, being called, right? I think what in your faith life brings you to this work? What in your faith life brings you to this work and keeps you going?
What it brings me to it, you definitely have to have a sense of awareness of who you are. First and foremost, it has to be God. Because if it's not God, then you're just operating on your own will and not his will. So for me, my faith has to be so tough and so tight, I should say, with God that nothing can come in between that. And let me give a good example. Let's say I walk into your room and you're a patient and you look up and see this lady black with glasses on. You be like, that's not what I see as a chaplain. Go give me somebody else. I have to have tough skin for that, but I have to respect it. Because whatever her wishes is, and this is a true story, whatever her wishes is or his wishes was to meet him where he was. And with me talking and laughing and say, oh, Jesus, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt your view. He bust out laughing. We had a good laugh about it. But we end up being able to set a tone for me to come see him, pray with him, meet his family. But the bottom line is, if I would have gotten uncomfortable with that, I never would have had the most beautiful experience with him or his family. If I would have took that so harsh because I didn't know who I was. So I would say the first thing, each caregiver or anyone that's called, you definitely need to understand and accept that calling is on your life. You need to own your space. And your space is walking into your spiritual authority, no matter who's in the room. Not in a way where you're taking over, but in a way you're so humble that you can meet anybody at any given time and be okay with it and still walk out and feel like you did what God has called you to do because of your certainty of yourself and your faith in whomever you believe, whether it's God, Buddha, whatever it is you believe in. You have to know who you are and who you represent and always walk in that spiritual authority.
Thank you.
So how our faith calls us to this work?
Yeah, how your faith life calls you to this work and how it sustains you in this work, I think, provides the strength.
I think part of it for me, for faith calling to this work, in a way it was deliberate, but in a way was just blind, dumb, this is where you're assigned to go kind of thing. So there is a sense of standing under God, standing under something that is beyond you, and having some kind of trust in God, in others who work with you, that you're not alone in this work. How faith has sustained me in this work in the military, and particularly in hospitals, in military hospitals, part of what is central to my faith, and I, like some others at PLU and some not at PLU, I'm from the Lutheran tradition, and one thing that's central to us is an idea that God rises in places where the world says God is not. That God's life comes in places that are very dark. And sometimes blindly, dumbly, or under some kind of submission, walking into some of the darkest places is where I have experienced God meeting me incarnate in the person who is standing or lying before me. And some of those examples have happened overseas in some of those soft structure hospitals. One was in a hard structure hospital, also in San Antonio, because as Chaplain Brown said, that hospital would medevac people in from not only the United States, but also Latin America. And in one situation, there was a man who had been medically evacuated from Latin America. He was not Latin American. He was probably from somewhere in Southeast Asia trying to get somewhere else and going through Latin America. And not many people in that hospital could communicate with him. And as some of these other chaplains were talking about, walking into a room and trying to be present with people or understand where they're coming from, it was very difficult with him. He was on the 6th floor. So we just looked out the window at cars in the parking lot and played a dumb guessing game of which car are you thinking of, and just clapping, but no words. And he was there probably for 2-3 months. I saw him in the lobby one morning after months had passed, and he was in his wheelchair, duffel bag down by his feet, and I was wondering what was happening, and he beckoned me to him, and he said in very broken English, he said, "Go, go." And I said, "Yeah, you're leaving. I'm very happy for you." And he said, "No, you didn't get it." And he made me he beckoned for me to kneel down before his wheelchair, and he made the sign of the cross from my faith onto my body, and he said, "Father, Son, Holy Spirit, go." That he was sending me out on a mission that I didn't even know that I had, finding a connection with me in my faith language from him. I hope that he found some connection from me as well. But those moments of encounter with people that surprise you is something that has sustained me in this work.
Thank you.
That's really touching. Thank you for sharing that. From the earliest I can remember, I had a sense of God within me and that my life was meant for a purpose. And I knew I wanted to have children. I knew I was interested in healthcare, and I went about my young life until I was 16 and was in Columbus, Ohio, to say goodbye to my grandmother, who had leukemia, and she'd been given about 3 weeks to live. And my mom and I sat with a care provider. I think it was a physician, because my takeaway from this was I want to be a doctor, which I was already interested in and kind of on that path. But the quality of care that provider offered, it was probably what I would now call a goals of care conference, which is essentially when a provider is delivering difficult news, a prognosis, sort of what to expect in the coming days or weeks. And the quality of his care was so profound, so generous, and so there was an eternal quality about it. I don't know quite how to explain it, but there was something that happened in that was an alchemy that touched me so deeply. I thought, that's what I want to do for people, and I'm going to be a doctor. And I did my Bachelor of Science at Western. I did the pre-med. I had most of my prerequisites there, so I finished, and I thought, well, I'll go to med school. And then I worked in an emergency room to get my education, or my, practice or whatever, in a healthcare setting, so that I could go to apply to med school. And I realized that's not what doctors do. That's different. That's not quite it. I ended up pursuing nursing. I realized that's not quite it either. I think there's a reason I'm obsessed with the chaplain here at this hospital, is I think it's spiritual care. It took me a little while to figure that out. But I didn't want to be a minister. I knew I wanted to be a chaplain. And as a young woman, I'm aging myself, 26 years ago, that I it wasn't as evident how I might do that, how I might go into chaplaincy as a 20-something, young woman that of sort of ambiguous faith at the time. So I kind of put it on the back burner. And instead, I found my way into marketing and communications and ultimately was doing software marketing. And I will tell you, chaplaincy is hard work, but it is nowhere near as difficult for me as software marketing, which drained my soul and will to live. So I left that job in 2019 knowing I need to do something else. I have to do something that is, I know a lot of people struggle with what they're called to do. What does God want for my life? I knew that when I was 16. I just didn't know how. And I didn't have a master's of divinity, and I thought this is going to be a long road, and I'm a single mom, and I live in Seattle, and I don't have a lot of money to go back to school. How am I going to make this work? And lo and behold, I didn't have to, because God found a way to create a path for me to chaplaincy. And I ended up talking with the person who became our educator, and she said, there's an equivalency pathway. I had studied yoga, I had studied energy medicine, I had these sort of esoteric studies that she accepted as my sort of qualification of advanced training, and that kind of set the path for me. I've said enough, but I will close by saying what sustains me is the same thing that sustains my faith, which is the mystery of this work. I mean, just hearing these stories of these chaplains, there's such beauty and wonder in the work that we do every day. It is hard. It is, there is anguish and despair at times, but it is also hopeful and glorious and touching and meaningful. And that alone sustains me in a way that I can't imagine any other career ever could.
So how does my faith bring me to this work and sustain me in it? I'll start by saying that I believe that I was created by God, or that I'm celebrated by a God who loves me not for what I do, but simply for who I am. And for me, that's my first calling, is simply to just love and be loved by God. Apart from that, my path to chaplaincy was kind of like something that I discovered. I didn't know it's a kind of a really niche thing and not something that I knew existed until I encountered it in college. But I knew that my purpose and my calling wasn't necessarily to one specific pathway or one specific vocation, but that my purpose, what I believe that I was put on this earth to do, was to create spaces of unconditional love that allow people to heal and to be liberated. And that is the gifting that through my own story that I've discovered about myself. And so finding the vocation that both lined up with my passions and my gifting was that sweet spot. And that's how I found myself in this line of work specifically. And there's a good feeling when you are in that space and you feel like you're doing exactly what you were put on this earth to do. And there's a liberating feeling in knowing that I could do something else and be just as fulfilled. Like, my calling is not to chaplaincy. And so for that is the season that I am now, and I'm loving it. And that may change down the road, and it may be something else. But the sustaining thing in that is knowing that I'm like my purpose, what I feel like I'm being placed to do, can be actualized in a number of different things. And I think that's maybe part of what also sustains me in this line of work, which is heavy at times, and hard work. I think, yeah, that sustains me. And also that when you're doing something like that isn't soul draining, right? Like the marketing job, for example, there's less chance of you just kind of burning out in that line of work. And so I think that's also part of it.
Thanks. I'm asking questions, but I'm also, Merritt's also asked me to share a little bit. And I think I'll take this moment to share just a little bit and answer my own question. Partly because we aim to have an interfaith panel. I'm Buddhist, and we're not theistic. That's not part of our tradition. So what called me to spend my sabbatical year from PLU working at a hospital was my Buddhist faith. Particularly the kind of call in Buddhism that living in a world of change is hard, and our job as people is to be compassionate and to try to help others in this world of change. And vows I've taken within my tradition to act with compassion. And so that's something that called me to chaplaincy work. It's something that appeals about chaplaincy work, the chance to make that spaces of unconditional love, to be there. I was also sustained during that time by my engagement with Buddhism, my practice of meditation, but also a firm commitment that everybody is deserving of care, and that we're all going through it, this life of change. So I just wanted to add that as a member of this panel. And that brings to the theme of interfaith. So I tried to sneak it in that first question, but I'm just going to ask it now, because I think it's a big part of, I think certainly in medical chaplaincy, but as I understand it, in military chaplaincy, a lot of what you're doing is working across traditions, right? Certainly as a Buddhist, and I worked at St. Joe's, right, which is a Catholic hospital, but we all have to be interfaith at that hospital. So if you're ever at St. Joe's and you're not Catholic, don't worry. They'll take care of you. Like they're trained to take care of you. They're ethically bound to take care of you. But as a Buddhist, it meant I spent a lot of time saying the Lord's Prayer. So luckily, right, I grew up in a Catholic family till I was about 12. So I got the Lord's Prayer down. But I think on a daily basis, it was, at least 5 times, if not more, as a Buddhist, to fully enter that prayer with people who wanted it, right, who needed it. And that was part of my role. So for me, being a religious minority in a culture that's predominantly Christian, interfaith is that's the default. But I know that's, even if you're Christian, you're going to deal with patients and soldiers and others and families who are in different traditions. So what is interfaith? How do you interfaith chaplain? How do you do that? And you can talk about this practically, like, well, here's how I get resources for soldiers who need, Islamic resources or something. Or how do you do that spiritually? I'm curious. Maybe we'll start going this way. We can, because I know we started with you several times. We'll head down this way. We can switch it up.
Sounds good. I'll start by answering it spiritually first, and then go into maybe some of the practical things that we do. For me personally, like my own values, my own worldview, my own set of spiritual practices, which I value and are important to me, and are things that sustain me in the line of work. I think as a base, I'm solid enough, I don't know if that's the right word, but solid enough in my own values and faith that is not something that is shaken because I am providing care from someone with a different tradition than mine, or it doesn't feel challenged by that. Like it's not even something that I really think about, to be honest, going into the room. And part of that too is that holding space for someone else is not about me, right? Like, and that's something that's deep within our training, is that it's not about you, and we're all very aware of kind of what we bring into the space and how maybe our own stuff that we haven't worked through can sometimes show up, and it's time to reflect and work on that. which we did a lot of that in our CPE training at St. Joe's, and a lot of reflection. But I think that work also has enabled me to like hold space for other traditions of all backgrounds, and not just people who have a faith tradition, because I also hold space for people who don't have any specific faith background that they grew up in. I've had wonderful visits and conversations with kind of the whole spectrum, to theistic, atheist, agnostic, spiritual, not spiritual, right? Kind of the whole gamut of worldviews that exists out there. And part of that also to me is beautiful, getting to witness other traditions. There's a beauty in that, and I found at least that no matter the worldview, the religion, the tradition, there's so much that connects us just as human beings, right? In the human experience, there's so much that we connect over, regardless of. So there's a beauty for me in experiencing and at times getting to participate in those. On a practical level, there's a lot of things that I do interfaith, one of them being collaborating with religious leaders in the local community that Seattle Children's is in. Sometimes families will request a specific religious representative, like a rabbi or an imam. And so we have a good relationship with local religious leaders. We keep spiritual and religious things on hand. Like we have like holy water on tap, I swear, like we never run out. Because that's a big request from our Catholic patients. For example, we have rosaries, we have books, we have prayer mats, we have head coverings, we have a pretty good variety of things that we keep on hand. We also, sometimes families will ask us to facilitate or lead rituals. I've done a lot of baptisms, both Catholic and Christian. A couple of our chaplains on our team at Seattle Children's a few months ago had the opportunity to do a wedding for caregivers where their child was dying and they wanted the child to be a part of the wedding ceremony, and that was a really cool thing. Sometimes families will ask to just create, like, brainstorm a ritual to help commemorate the moment. And so on a practical level, kind of do it all.
Wow, thanks.
Would you repeat the question, please? I know we're talking about interfaith relations, but
Yeah.
specifically.
And you can answer this spiritually, practically, both. How do you engage across religions? How do you engage in chaplaincy work across in an interfaith capacity?
I hope it's okay if I riff a little on the idea of interfaith. I think in a way that it over indexes. I try to tell people when I enter a room, I will say, "Hi, my name is Minda. I wonder if you'd like some companionship." That's generally how I will introduce myself or begin the visit. What I try not to do is walk in and say, "Hi, I'm Minda. I'm a chaplain," because people are like, "Am I dying?" They think I'm there with news, which I don't deliver that news. So sometimes I will say, "Hi, I'm Minda." They look at my badge. It says chaplain. I say, "I'm not here with any news. I'm just here to offer support. I wonder if I could sit down for a few minutes," something like that. I will try to lead with spiritual care instead of chaplain, because I want them to know I'm not there to focus on religion. And chaplain has, the word chaplain is so strongly affiliated with religion. I would venture that about 80% of people that I visit, even those who are faithful or churched, they don't often ask for me to pray with them. Or they'll say, "Our pastor was here." and we have a conversation about access to their home and their new wheelchair or something like that. It's not necessarily what you imagine the conversation will be about. So I guess I respectfully push back a little bit about the notion of the relevance of interfaith. What it's really about is how do we meet each other? I think that the heart of that question is really asking, how do we meet each other effectively? How do we companion well those who are different from us? And what informs my approach in that regard is remembering that human beings have two key needs, fundamental needs. We all have them: attachment and belonging. That's what we all need. And for every person that's in the hospital, those needs are at risk. So remembering that I am here to offer belonging. I'm here as a witness to this person who's just been diagnosed with terminal cancer to say, you matter to someone. You matter to me, this perfect stranger. People are so moved by that. Not that it's me, but just, wow, someone cares about me. Yes, yes. And then we form an attachment. We form a bond through our shared experience of humanity. It doesn't matter if they're Buddhist or Jewish or Muslim. It really, I find that it matters for people in the way that they use religion to orient themselves, to identify themselves, to practice and to praise God and to worship. Certainly those are relevant things, and I'm very happy to offer support in those regards. But I also think that there are so many ways that we can meet each other that are sort of outside of the realm of religion. And for our population at Virginia Mason, about 80% of the time, that's a rough estimate, but people that's not what they want from me. That's not what they're interested in. That's not where they take the conversation. And I go where they lead. So we also have all of the items that Eddie mentioned in terms of, Bibles in Spanish and Book of Mormon and prayer rugs and things like that. We have an interfaith chapel. I suppose it just seems like given that, of course, we are there to respect and honor people of all faiths, persuasions, orientations, etc.
Thanks for answering that in your own way. And I think that said volumes. I think how you answered that says a lot about how chaplains approach things. And I am also curious. I think the demands of military chaplains, there's some things that are the same and there's some things that are different. So I'm really curious about how you interfaith. Yeah.
So a lot of our interfaith is just practical, as we've talked about. As chaplains, we're assigned to a unit, and we chaplains have a faith tradition that may not reflect many or even any in our units. And so part of interfaithing is finding those commonalities. In what ways can I, from my perspective, serve the people whom I'm called to serve from their perspective? In what ways am I open to do that, and are they open to receiving me? And in what ways, even if I'm open to serving them in a particular way, might they not want that from me? So knowing my chaplains around me, from units side to side, up and down. Hey, I have a chaplain, I might tell Chaplain Brown, I have a chaplain from this tradition and they need this. And so my interfaithing then is not me interfaithing, but being particular for the need of the person who wants something particular. And I think, again, it's feeling out who's around you, what do they need, what's important to them. It may be the case, as I think, Eric, you said you know the Lord's Prayer, and you can say the Lord's Prayer and say it with Catholics. In the military, we have some prayer books that have prayers that cross faith. So if there were a soldier outside of the Christian tradition, be it in a book that I know, Jewish or Muslim, there are some prayers that I can say at the point of death. But if that person doesn't want me to be doing that, I don't want to offend their faith in their time of need. And so part of interfaithing too is just getting to know who are you serving, what do they need, what do they want, what might offend their faith, and if they need something that you can't give, who might be able to do that for them?
I think that's a good question. And speaking from experience, for me, the bottom line is respect. Let's say, for instance, as I'm in a unit, I want to know who's in that unit, what their background is. And you might say, I might have 10 Buddhists, I might have 2 Muslims, I might have a host of Protestants and other religions. To interfaith with that is for me to know who I am ministering to or who I'm responsible for. And that is communicating. So if I'm in the room with you guys and I find out who's what, then I need to make sure you have what you need. And communicate. And you might say, well, chaplain, I'm good. I don't need anything from you. But you may need someone else within your faith tradition. That is my responsibility to make sure you have what you need then. You know, make sure I can get a Buddhist or someone, a chaplain or a Catholic or whatever to come or tell you where to go to get the necessary needs that you're requiring. So my interfaith is basically knowing who I'm dealing with in my organization, making sure I can resource those items or anything, whether it's items or individual personnel out so that they can get what they need, but respecting it as well, whether they need me or need someone else. I want to make sure I'm taking care of them, because when you're taking care of people, in the long run, people are really taking care of you, because it makes your calling even more genuine to know that it doesn't matter what you are or what you serve or who you serve, but that I respect it, and then I'm making sure I meet your needs across the board and bring an individual in to do the same. So for me, the first thing is respect and interfaith, and then not only that, but going and communicating. Talking to the individual, hey, what is it you need? How can I help someone, or can I get someone to you, and then get those resources? And they may say, chaplain, I'm good, or can you just sit here with me? Can you just be in the moment? That's opening doors to be able to touch hearts beyond our, faith, but most of all, our commonality to understand each other. And so that's the bottom line when it comes for me and connecting with people of different faith backgrounds.
And I want to piggyback on Chaplain Brown when she talks about resourcing and getting people what they need. One practical way is really leaning into, we have Chaplain Wayaka here, who we're going to hear from later, but he's a Buddhist military chaplain, and that's what we call a low-density chaplain. So there aren't a whole lot of Buddhist chaplains across the military, but there may be Buddhist soldiers who have needs. And so part of what we do for resourcing, I can remember I had an Orthodox priest colleague of mine, and when things were a little bit more hot and heavy in Iraq and Afghanistan, he was flying, even though he was stationed here stateside, he was flying back and forth into those operations so that the Orthodox soldiers were able to get care from an Orthodox chaplain in the place where their civilian Orthodox priest would not be able to go. And so it's trying to figure out, where are our people? What are their needs? Who can provide it? And how do we get them there? And so Chaplain Wayaka, he might travel a lot more than I would, because I'm a Protestant chaplain, and I say I'm a dime a dozen. Somebody could find another Protestant chaplain. But these low-density chaplains, we really lean into to help provide interfaith care, sometimes intra-faith, to ensure that our soldiers are getting the care that they deserve and that they need.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time, and I bet there's some questions. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to questions for us, for the four of you primarily. Merritt, did you want to run the question situation? Do we have separate microphones, or I can just hand you a microphone? Yeah. And Merritt, if you want to start with a question, of course you're welcome to.
You can call on people. I'll run my. Oh, okay. All right, I will do that. But for running the microphones, well, I forget that I can actually talk into this. I was going to go up there. Could we get some questions for our chaplains? Yes. Here, and we'll bring microphones, so even if you think you're loud, it's not great for people with hearing difficulties if we don't use the microphone. So we'll wait for the microphone, please.
Andrew, my question is, CPE is a part of the required training for all ELCA pastors. Just for your own experiences, where do you see the benefit of chaplain training, even in congregations or outside of hospitals?
I love that question. I think CPE, even like just one unit, is highly beneficial for like a congregational pastor, even if you never intend to go into any form of chaplaincy. Yeah, so CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. It's kind of like your clinical training in the hospital. In order to become a chaplain, you need 4 units. 1 unit is comprised of 300 patient-facing hours where you're providing care and 100 hours of academic work where you're working with a cohort of other chaplains and your educator, talking about a variety of topics, but primarily learning to sit with your own suffering so that you can learn to sit with the suffering of others. And so that's CPE in a nutshell. And I think the reason why it's beneficial is because I have yet to meet a human being who does not carry wounds and trauma from existing as a human being. And not necessarily capital T trauma in that I was abused physically, right, as a child. I'm thinking also lowercase t trauma. There are wounds that we carry and messages that we internalize about ourselves. And I think there are so many congregational pastors and leaders out in the world who have gone into the line of work not knowing that through being a congregational pastor, they were actually trying to heal a worthiness wound that from childhood, for whatever reason, right, there's a number of reasons that could happen. Maybe it was parents who were emotionally unavailable, or maybe it was not necessarily what parents said, but what they left unsaid that left you questioning your identity and am I, right? And so like, and often what I think happens is, right, we project that pain onto our congregation, mostly unaware, even while doing good work, at the same time projecting that pain and sometimes leaving behind us a wake of other people that were hurting in that process. And I think what CPE can offer is the opportunity to confront yourself and learn to sit with your own suffering so that when you're holding space as a congregational pastor, you're doing so in a way where you're not projecting your own pain onto your congregation and leading from a space of, I'm not leading from a space of like my unhealed wound of trying to like heal myself through this, but I'm leading from a grounded space.
Oh, okay, here first.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Josiah. I'm over here if you can't see me. I'm wondering in terms of the military being a hierarchical system, but being a chaplain who's kind of meant to be there for whomever, how does rank play a role in how you're able to show up for various members within that ranked system? Did I say that well?
I think so. And if
you.
we don't, I'll defer to Chaplain Brown too if I don't quite. So on the one hand, a chaplain is a chaplain is a chaplain. We all go by chaplain in the military regardless of our rank. When we first come into the military, at least in the Army, we're assigned to what's called a battalion. So we typically work, our boss is a lieutenant colonel, we're typically a captain, and we serve people who are sort of in our flock, I guess, who would be lieutenant colonel the highest on down to private. As we progress as chaplains in rank, we serve commanders and units at a higher, who serve at a higher echelon. And on the one hand, the rank doesn't doesn't matter. A chaplain is a chaplain is a chaplain. Sometimes the commander at a higher echelon will have his or her chaplain, official chaplain, be the chaplain who is assigned to him or her as their brigade chaplain, battalion chaplain, division chaplain. They may have an affinity. Let's say if the commander was Roman Catholic and one of the captain chaplains was also Roman Catholic, that commander might receive some religious support from the lower echelon chaplain, potentially. But part of the reason why we chaplains also carry rank is because we're on the commander's staff. And not only do we provide religious support for our unit, but we also provide advice to the commander on issues of how religion may affect operations. And how doing X, Y, or Z as a unit, what ramifications might that have in the community in which we are, doing our operations? And so we serve as a staff. And so part of the reason why as we move up in rank, we're also getting not only our religious education, but we're getting a military education for understanding military strategy, military operations. Whereas when we're starting, it's sort of more on what we would call a tactical level. And that's where rank sort of comes in to help, because we're able to advise those commanders with a little more understanding.
And to add to that, on every rank pretty much is a chaplain. So even at the highest level with our chief of chaplain 2-star and then 1-star and then us colonels and all the way down, every pretty much ranking order in the military has a chaplain accessible to them. So no matter how high you go, there's still a chaplain that will be able to cater to those within that certain rank or within that certain area for them to take care of their religious and spiritual needs too.
So a private might not want to get religious support from a chaplain colonel, and likewise a colonel might not want to receive religious support from a chaplain captain, and so that's sort of how, but a chaplain is a chaplain is a chaplain also.
Great. We'll take a question back here.
Hello, my name is Tyler. I'm a student here, and I just wanted to say how admirable the work that you're doing is. And while introducing yourselves, one of you said something that was really beautiful about, I believe it was one in the middle, talking about how selling computers was like devastating, draining to your soul. But you also talked about how beautiful and how fulfilling of a job it was and how it felt like a life calling. But how do you deal with like such scarce or like such harsh topics like death and mourning? Like, how do you guys temper your soul, and how do you guys able to be so strong enough to care for another person? Like, how do you get comfortable with those things? That's my question.
Are you asking all of us, or are directed to anyone? Okay.
If I may reiterate your question to make sure I understand it, how do we deal with the magnitude of life and death and everything in between that we face every day? I think that for me it is an extraordinary gift that I get to be faced with the full spectrum of life, death, and everything in between every day. And that has allowed me to become really familiar with the reality of a life cycle, and that it's normalized death for me. And I do not, I quite honestly, I look forward to dying. I have a son that is beloved and I adore him, but I'm really curious, and I'm so curious what happens next. I also love my life. It's not something I fear, and that's largely because I have witnessed so much death, and what I have seen is that it appears to be profoundly peaceful. The deceased often look tremendously serene, and that is a comfort to me to that the comfort, it's a comfort that sustains me, but it also continues to kind of tease my curiosity and help me, kind of come to terms with what I don't know, and to kind of live in the mystery in that way.
I think that's a good question. I'm just going to be transparent. It's hard. What I mean by that is because you're meeting people, greeting people who are hurting, and you have to know how to navigate and meet them where they are, but at the same token, wonder if you're dealing with death and someone in your family just died. Now you're trying to minister to someone that's doing that. I think a lot of times is you just have to go in, and this is your faith, is a faith walk, not knowing what to say. And sometimes we don't always have to say something. Sometimes I'm just there holding a hand. But when you're faced with that, I got to lean on the Holy Spirit. I got to lean on God. Lord, I don't even know what to say right now because I'm going through my own stuff. But at the same token, he called me to be with that person. So I have to walk in a room or walk on a battlefield, and I'm trusting every portion that he called me to this, and he's going to equip me to be there and say what need to be said, and sometimes not to say anything. So when we're going through that, and there's a lot of times you say things and you're there with them, and then you come back and be like, oh, Jesus, I hope that touched them. And you don't even know till months later that somebody said, hey, what you said touched me. And you don't even remember what you said because that was the Holy Spirit. That wasn't even you talking. So that's the trust that you have to have because you're answering your calling. At the same token, you need to go back and reflect. Okay, I was hurting through that. Or you need to have a safe space where you can go tell someone, hey, I walked in the room today and I didn't even know what I was doing. You think I was okay? And have someone honestly tell you that it's okay. Because a lot of times you don't know until you are in that situation. Whether it's death, whether it's someone getting married, whether you're baptizing a child, you know what needs to be done. But a lot of times the words sometimes may not formulate until you're there in that moment. So I would always say trust your calling, trust whom you serve, walk in faith, and when you need to release the energy that came upon you, release it decent in order, regain your strength, reset, refocus, and go back out and do what you're called to do, and trust. For me, it's trust God that he equipped me and he's not going to leave me hanging when it's time to go to battle. I hope that makes sense.
That's a really good question, so thank you for asking it. For me, it starts with acknowledging and recognizing my own mortality, that someday too I will die, as we all in this room will, and becoming comfortable with that. And so confronting that, and there's also an aspect of being around death so much. I don't know that I'll ever become desensitized or numb to it. I think it's too beautiful of work to become numb to it. But you become comfortable with it. And something that gives me great comfort is, and also takes off the pressure, is I don't go into the room worried about what to say, because I trust that the greatest gift I can offer in this moment of grief is just the gift of my regulated nervous system when everything for them is chaos. That is really the greatest gift I can offer in that space, not the words that I'm going to say. And that takes off so much pressure and allows me to just be in the moment. And it's hard to describe what those moments are like, because it really does feel like a dance, and I'm following where they're going. And I remember a specific experience where it was my night on call, and I had been working with this family for several months during their daughter's hospitalization, and it just happened that my night that I was on call was the night that she died. And I was called in, so I came to the hospital at like 2 in the morning, which it's tough when you're on call. So thankfully, I'm on call only one night a week. But it was just this beautiful moment of holding both the tension of this moment is so deeply painful and so sad, and yet also recounting the joys and the memories that they're holding on to, and facilitating kind of this life review for the family, being able to say and share things they loved about their daughter, things that they will miss, things that they want to say I'm sorry for, things they want to ask forgiveness for. It's this beautiful moment. And then when I leave the room, leaving what is theirs to be theirs. And so I've become very cognizant of like what is mine that comes up in the space, what is theirs, and what is ours to share for that moment. And when I leave with what is mine. I leave what is theirs as theirs. And I remember what we shared as this beautiful moment. And so, and also having important unplugging and self-care outside of that. So like when I'm out, when I'm off the clock, I'm completely off, right? I don't check emails. Thankfully I don't get calls outside of work. And having sustaining practices of self-care and not just self-maintenance, like going to the gym and getting sleep is self-maintenance and you need that to run. But true caring for the self is finding those things that like bring you joy. Like when you do that thing, it just makes your body go, and having those kind of sustaining practices sustain me for those really dark, heavy moments.
I just want to add one more thing. Oh, sorry, Merritt. I just want to add one more thing, which is there's a song by Jason Isbell. I don't know if any of you know that artist, but it's called If We Were Vampires. And what he's acknowledging in the song is that, in other words, if we lived eternally, then life wouldn't have the same relevance. And I didn't mean to imply that it's easy, because certainly it is still very grievous at times and very sad. But I think it's contextualizing that death is, and welcoming and embracing that death is a part of life, and somewhat normalizing it instead of shunning it the way our culture tends to do. I think that also helps to transform my relationship with it. I didn't mean to. Did you want to add something else?
I wanted to be mindful of our time, and this is kind of the meat of things, and so I feel like, oh, but the clock says, but we'll honor the clock. Let's thank our speakers and panelists. And I also want to invite you, those snacks in the hallway, those were for you. So I don't know if you saw them, but grab some snacks on the way out. Students, stuff your pockets. And we'll see you later. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, I think we're gonna get going, even though it's kind of a Pacific Northwest thing to start about 5 minutes late. But we're gonna get going because I want to get us to our panel this evening. I'm going to invite our panel for the evening up in just a couple minutes. I want to just say welcome and good evening to our panel this evening of the critical interfaith work of U.S. Army Chaplain Corps, the chaplains. My name is Merritt Tralstead, and I am the University Chair of Lutheran Studies, as well as a professor in the Religion Department. As I was telling one of the chaplains, my first day at PLU was 9/11. The 9/11 was the very first day that I ever taught at PLU. The towers were falling as I was driving to campus. We're delighted to be partnering tonight with PLU's Religion Department, with Campus Ministry, the Center for Diversity, Justice, and Sustainability, and PLU's ROTC and Military Science Program to host this event, and my deep thanks go out to all of the people and the programs and the departments that are mentioned in the program, the back of the program, and they really make this whole event possible. Founded in 1890, PLU deeply engages its foundation in the Lutheran tradition while living into our 21st century context. As is the case for other Lutheran institutions of higher education, our Lutheran identity is rooted and open, which means we draw from and lift up key Lutheran values while also supporting all students, faculty, staff, alumni, families, and beyond in living out their core values and commitments, whether they stem from Lutheranism, Judaism, Buddhism, humanism, Islam, Hinduism, paganism, and more. The university, like the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, strives to be Lutheran and interreligious, embodying its rootedness and open stance in ways that build bridges, deepen connections, and spur collective action toward a more compassionate and understanding world. We are excited to host this event on the interfaith work of military chaplains because it shares resonance with our mission in Lutheran higher education. Military chaplains are called upon to embody a rooted and open approach as well. As clergy, they are rooted in their own particular religious traditions, and as religious leaders in a religiously diverse organization, they're called upon to be spiritual guides, teachers, ministers to all members of the military, whether they share the same tradition, practice, or outlook. Upon recommendation of another friend at an ELCA college, I contacted Chaplain Lieutenant Kirsten Hedlund about the possibility of partnering on an event at PLU where we might learn more about these chaplains and from these chaplains about leading these religiously rooted and open lives in the toughest of circumstances. As a way of setting the evening, I would like to mention PLU's Wild Hope Center for Vocation. What do we mean by vocation here? Our understanding of this term is informed by Martin Luther's view of vocation as a calling to work for the good of others. And in the Wild Hope Center for Vocation here on campus, we speak about vocation as being called to promote human and ecological flourishing. This aligns perfectly with PLU's educational mission to link thoughtful inquiry, learning, with service and care for other peoples, their communities, and the earth. The center helps people to think about, individually and in small groups and whole communities, wrestling with fundamental questions of vocation. Who am I called to be? What are the needs of the community? What am I called to do? This wrestling extends far beyond considering just what type of job or occupation you might pursue. And we encourage people to consider every aspect of their lives, all their relationships, experiences, and dimensions of their lives as different expressions of vocation in and through which we consider how we live out who we're called to be and the needs of the world. Fundamental to this wrestling is honoring the pluralistic nature of human community. This necessitates asking these kinds of questions of vocation, always in relation to my neighbor who is wrestling with the same questions and who may answer them very differently than I do. To nourish vocation, then, is to engage deeply in all the different ways that one's personally called to, and to honor all the different ways that one's neighbor is called, living into a dynamic and evolving openness together. While there are a variety of contexts that could uplift to show how we all daily navigate creative tensions like this in exemplary ways, military chaplains provide an aspirational example of living faithfully into a pluralist and often divided society. As I mentioned in the afternoon section, in a very deeply divided and polarized world, I'm not sure that many of us are called on to have that kind of a task of seeing the other person's meeting them on their terms, their grounds, and their values and beliefs. The very essence of their role requires a clear commitment to their own sense of identity, purpose, and calling, while also having a clear commitment to the identity, purpose, and calling of specific soldiers, their families, and accompanying soldiers as they carry out their unit's missions in both peace and war. Chaplains are charged to nurture the living, care for the wounded, and honor the fallen, all with an inter-religious context that respects and values the traditions of each person. It is an honor, therefore, to welcome our panelists and join them in conversation this evening. Before I introduce them, just a few notes about our time together. We'll be showing 3 different clips of the movie Fighting Spirit to help us get a sense of chaplains' lives and work. And interspersed with these clips, each of our guests will have the opportunity to share an overview of their vocational journey, giving us a glimpse as to what led them to be in this work and how their work and they continue to respond to these vocational questions. Who am I called to be and what am I called to do? Following this, we'll have about 15 minutes of conversation around some questions that I have in mind here. And during the whole time, though, I'm asking that you be thinking of your own questions, and the concluding part will be a Q&A where you're invited to bring your questions to the chaplains as well. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our Army chaplains with us today. And once they're seated, we're going to show you the first clip from the film that highlights the diversity of chaplains. Come on up, please. So we're mixing it up a little bit in format. So I have 3 questions. I'm going to be introducing our chaplains 2 at a time. and asking them to respond to these 3 questions. And the questions are the following, and then I will introduce the 2 first and then 2 second and our last chaplain. The questions are, tell us about the ways in which you felt called to a profession as a priest, pastor, or chaplain generally. Number 2, tell us about the ways in which you felt called to serve as a chaplain in the military. And then 3, please share a story that illustrates how your work as a military chaplain is interfaith in nature. I can remind people of questions too. They're mostly on East Coast time, so this is really, this is a struggle, but no, you're doing great. So it's a privilege to introduce to you the first 2 chaplains, Chaplain Colonel Deborah A. Brown and Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Cole. Chaplain Brown is a native of Detroit, Michigan. Maybe you could, yeah, okay, just letting people know. On the 8th of August in 2000, she began her military career as a 2nd Lieutenant Chaplain candidate. She's endorsed by the National Baptist Convention, USA, and was accessioned to active duty on the 15th of May, 2005. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Political Science from Virginia State University, Petersburg, Virginia, and a Master of Divinity from Hood Theological Seminary in North Carolina. She holds a Master of Arts degree in Family Life and Counseling from Webster University, and as is seen in her bio on our website, Chaplain Brown as a colonel's service and military honors are very extensive, and she brings a wealth of experience to us this evening. Chaplain Cole is a senior Washington Army National Guard chaplain, providing strategic and operational religious support advisement to the general staff and senior leaders of the Washington Army National Guard in support of state operations and federal overseas deployments. He is tasked with understanding diverse religious support needs of soldiers and to develop, implement, and execute successful religious support plans in support of 6,000 plus soldiers, as well as training and supervising chaplains and religious affairs specialists. He provides comprehensive pastoral care to senior leaders and soldiers to include weddings, memorials, ceremonies, graveside burials, notifications, and counseling. Chaplain Brown and Chaplain Cole, please share with us an overview of your vocational journeys.
So I went to elementary school just a few blocks from here, James Sales, and my granny and grandpa, we spent a lot of times at Paradise Bowl just down the road here, and putt-putt golf, right? So I live in Port Orchard. I have spent my entire career in the Army National Guard. I pastored for about 21 years with the Cherokee tribe in North Carolina before returning back to Washington State. I really was called to serve in this capacity as an extension of pastoring in the local church. So in my faith and my perspective, I serve a person, the person of Christ, not a place, not an organization. And so the military is an extension of that. I was really drawn specifically into the military because my dad was deployed from Fort Lewis. We were living in Graham at the time. And my birth mother had some problems and ran into some legal issues. She was arrested, was incarcerated, and it was a chaplain that actually signed the papers for my dad to return back home to Parkland from deployment, his second deployment. And so that was really the catalyst for me to consider as an extension of my local church ministry, there's a whole nother ministry there among the service members in a way that the chaplain served my father. So I now have the opportunity to serve other soldiers who often, in times of distress, the chaplain is the one who is interceding on their behalf. So, looking forward to talking more with you afterward tonight. Let me just say that there's a place for you in the Army National Guard here locally in Washington State, okay? Would love to have you.
Okay, so to answer the question about my vocation, I would say for me, it started early on, brought up and raised in church. And what I mean by that, and I'll get to the end part of this, so I'll make it short and sweet. But as a young person coming up in church, as I would become a teenager, like I was telling my table, we used to have plays, and you know how you have church and Easter plays and things of that nature. So I started on the creative side of it, you know, because I kept telling my pastor, this is boring. We can't identify with this in the real world. So he said, well, you write one. So that was the wrong thing to tell me, because I ended up writing one. And we ended up putting on plays. So ministry started for me in my vocation, serving the community, going in the community, finding out what are the issues that my young people were facing outside of people that I knew. But going in the neighborhood, what you going through, and that's how it started, and then that's how I began to write plays. Now let's fast forward to college. I got in college, I still had a relationship with the Lord. I've always loved the Lord, so I was in our college campus ministry. But it went even further than that, because the day I asked the Lord, what is it you want me to do? I always knew my Father's voice. And when he told me, I was like, And the reason I said, everybody, is because, all honesty, me growing up, I didn't see nobody look like me, even in my own culture. So I was like, God is tripping. He can't be calling me. So I went even deeper and say, okay, Lord, if you're really calling me and you want me to do this, then give me a sign. You know how sometimes we know we hear your Father's voice, but you still don't want to do it. But the obedience pull you back. So make a long story short, after I told my brother that, I said, when I know God is calling me, but I'm scared. He went on to say, hey, well, maybe you should be a military chaplain, because it was the chaplain that helped me when I was in the military. And that's why, when I became paralyzed from waist down, it was the chaplain that came. And I can see you doing that. You always helping people. You always, and I'm saying, I didn't want to hear that. So then next thing, and as I'm telling my table, I happened to be at a gas station and ran into a recruiter. And he was a chaplain, saying, hey, you should be in, and I see you got the sticker on the back of your school. You should come in and be an Army chaplain. You should be doing this. And I was like, no. So the development and the growth over the years, from church home to meeting that recruit at a gas station of all places, is what made me go ahead and decide, okay, Lord, I see the signs, from a brother to a stranger. And I followed and was obedient. And from there, the rest is actually history.
May I follow up and ask that question about, do you have a story that illustrates how your work as a military chaplain is interfaith in nature, interacting with other religious traditions?
Yes, for you too.
Yeah. So Washington Army National Guard, I was brigade chaplain for the 81st Stryker Brigade, and we deployed for all of 2021 to Ukraine. So we had the mission of training the AFU, the Armed Forces of Ukraine. And part of the mission for me as the chaplain was, at the time, Ukraine did not have any military chaplains. And so I worked with the senior Sheikh Siad, the senior Muslim in the nation, the senior rabbi, the senior Protestant, the senior Greek Catholic, and Ukrainian Orthodox chaplains who were serving their local congregation, but also working on creating a parliamentary bill to create the Ukrainian chaplain corps. So I ended up assisting them, advising them, and helping them understand how we do chaplaincy in order for them to be informed on how they can do it. And as we were leaving in December of 2021, the Rada, the parliament, passed the bill to create the Ukrainian military chaplain corps. And so now they have chaplains, they have pay, they have rank, they have actual uniforms that they wear. And that was a very interfaith enterprise, very interfaith effort among the entire country. So that would be perhaps a good example.
Sure. And a story illustrating your work that's interfaith.
Okay, the story that interfaith. I would say coming in as a young captain, being with my soldiers. And why I say that, because I was in a unit called BSTB, a Special Troop Battalion, and they were on their way out the wire to find the IEDs that the infantry guys would need to make a clear path and to shorten it up. So in this particular group of soldiers were different faith. So I'm coming together and say, let's pray. And then you have some that say, well, Chap, I don't believe in God. No, I don't want to do that. You might be jinxing us. And then you have others, well, ma'am, I'm this, ma'am, I'm that. So for me, at that moment as a young captain and hearing all the different responses was, okay, everyone, I respect that. But as I was telling my table, let's do a prayer of protection. And that prayer of protection, I began to say, I'm going to pray in my faith as you pray in yours. And even if you don't have one, then just bear with us and listen if you want to stand by. And the soldiers did that. And then after we did the prayer, we all came together from different walks of life. I said, okay, huddle in, guys, because it was all mostly guys going out. We put our hand together, and we hollered, "Who?" and they went out. So my interfaith right there taught me that not only did I give the respect to them, but they also gave the respect later on, because they start asking even more, can we pray before we go out? Can we pray before we go out? And so it got to a pattern that I never would let them go out without prayer. And that was giving respect to all the different faith that was in that circle with us, going out to make sure all the soldiers stay safe.
Thank you so much. All right. I will, thank you very much, Chaplains Brown and Cole. And we have another clip that we're going to watch where we hear 4 chaplain stories. And after that, I've got Chaplain Bayaka and Chaplain Headland. You're up next. Go ahead. Thank you.
For over 200 years, combat chaplains have provided the bedrock of care for every branch of the military. Some chaplains have done heroic things. Some have died during their service. And some died too soon afterwards. But with all of them, their presence in combat changed lives, including your own. During my service, the legacies of the chaplains who came before me were my North Star, my guiding light.
It's now my privilege to introduce to you Chaplain Sankran Wayaka and Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Kirsten Hedlund. Chaplain Captain Sankran Wayaka was born in the Chiang Rai province in Thailand in 1972. He was raised in a Buddhist family, ordained as a Buddhist novice when he was 13, and ordained as a Buddhist monk in 1993. He served his faith as a Buddhist novice and monk in Thailand for 12 years. He spent another 10 years serving Buddhist communities in California and other states as a Buddhist missionary monk. Chaplain Wayaka earned a BA degree in humanities in Bangkok, Thailand in 1997, further degrees from City College of San Francisco in 2006 and 2009, and a master's degree in Buddhist chaplaincy from the University of the West in 2014. Following military training, Captain Wayaka's ministry assignments included chaplain candidacy in Los Alamitos, California, and battalion chaplain in Scottsdale, Arizona. He accessioned to active duty in the U.S. Army in September 2019 and has since served as a battalion chaplain at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and since 2023 at Joint Base Lewis McChord. Chaplain Hedlund joined the Army through the ROTC in 1989. She commissioned as an intelligence officer for a short time before she transferred to the Chaplain Corps in 2005. She had planned to serve as a civilian pastor after completing her military obligation, but was instead thrilled for an opportunity to combine her military and ministry vocations in the Chaplain Corps. In tandem with her chaplaincy, she has, on the side, accomplished the small feat of working through the PhD program at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago and will defend her dissertation this November 6th in Theology and Ethics. Chaplain Wayaka and Chaplain Hedlund, please share with us an overview of your vocational journeys, and I can repeat the questions since there's three. Something about the way that you felt called to a profession as a priest, pastor, chaplain generally, about the ways you felt called to serve as a chaplain in the military in particular, and then to share a story that illustrates your work as a military chaplain that's interfaith in nature. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. How many, when I walk into this campus, I see a lot of international students. How many students from Thailand? No, right? Same thing, when I ask my soldier, in my formation, 400 soldiers, how many Buddhist soldiers here? None of them, not raise their hand, right? But I have a Buddhist insignia on my, actually when we wear the work uniform, we have for a chaplain, we wear a religious insignia on our patrol cap, okay? For a Christian chaplain, wear the cross. For a Buddhist chaplain, we have a Buddhist wheel, the black one here. I confuse people every day, who am I? Because the Buddhist chaplaincy in the army, like less than 25 years. I'm here in the army for, this is my 13 years. And first thing first, gonna come to the soldier mind, when they see my Buddhist insignia, they're gonna say, oh, that's transportation officer, because it look like the wheel. Some soldier even, sir, are you from the Navy? No, I'm from the Army, right here, right? But anyway, I heard people say that, you know what? If you join the chaplain corps, public speaking, right? That they do for living, right, for a chaplain. How a former Buddhist monk gonna be in the chaplaincy? Because when a lot of soldiers came to me and asked the question that, sir, did you talk when you were a monk? I respond to those soldiers that, you know what? Within my 21 years, I speak 5 sentences. 1 sentence for my 5 years, okay? You want to hear it? Okay, my first sentence from my fifth year anniversary, the head monk come to me and asked me that, what you have to say? I said, hail me Buddha, or hail me God, right? So my second anniversary, my second sentence was, hang in there. So my 15 years, I said, never quit. So when I hit 20 years, I said, almost there. So my final year, I said, pop smoke. Anybody know about what pop smoke? Pop smoke is the military term. It's kind of like, if you finish 20 years, you disappear from the army. So that's pop smoke. So that's in my joke for anyone who come to me, sir, did you talk when you were a monk? Yes, I do talk, right? But anyway, after 21 years in the Buddhist monastery, I have no hair. I have no Syrian clothes, yet I do have, saddle, no covered shoe. 2 times a day meal, breakfast and lunch, nothing by mouth in the afternoon. Tea, coffee, Coca-Cola, milk, okay, no alcohol. And soldier, sir, I can't do that. I said, you know what? The hardest part was no girlfriend and no wife. Soldier said, sir, leave me alone. So after I finished 21 years in the monastery and I heard about the army chaplaincy, I said, hey, that is very challenging. I would like to try. I joined the army when I was 39. Year 2011. I'm 53 now. But I motivate myself by what? By flip the number. I'm 35. Right? I'm 35. And I know exactly what I can do in the army. I encourage soldiers that, sir, you know what? If the MOS that you are doing now not right for you, you can reclass to do another MOS until you find what is your career that you want to be, what is your passion. But for me, I know exactly what I'm gonna do in the army. Because what? Because I pay out of my pocket $40,000 for student loan to earn my master's degree. I have 1 more year to pay off my student loan. I have 1 more year. And when I joined the army, Asian face, and without prior service experience in the army, as an army reserve, I received the email saying that, oh, you're gonna do in processing at your reserve unit. I not even know what is in processing. I walk inside the building with my patrol cap and I salute the private inside the building. Good morning. I thought salute is a military greeting, right? Like shake hand, right? But anyway, this brings me to the army chaplaincy. That, you know what? I was a Buddhist monk in San Francisco Bay Area, 11 years. Surrounded with Thai Buddhist community, eat Thai food and speak Thai all day long. I thought I was in Thailand, even though in San Francisco Bay Area, right? So I asked myself, why I'm here in America? I want to try something different. And I popped smoke from the monastery and I joined the army as a Buddhist chaplain. And what I like here in America, they don't look at my last name or my broken English. I'm very proud that because what? Thailand only one country in Southeast Asian country that never colonized by any other countries. So we don't speak French or any or other foreign language. We eat Thai food and speak Thai all day long, right? So I always tell people that, hey, if I make you laugh, I think that's good enough, right? If I understand you, you understand me, that's it. And again, in Buddhism, we believe reincarnation. I said, you know what? I have to die and born again in USA, stamp in my back, made in USA. So I speak English perfectly, right? So what I like in the army, they allow me to exercise my religion as a Buddhist and also to support others, what we call to perform and to provide. If a Buddhist soldier can come to me, sir, can you conduct a Buddhist wedding ceremony for me? Yes, I can. If a Catholic soldier came to me, sir, can you conduct Catholic wedding ceremony for me? I'm gonna tell him or her that, you know what, I'm a Buddhist chaplain, I'm not qualified to do that. But I do have 16 cap. We have a Christian, we have a Jewish, we have a Catholic, and we have chaplain. We're gonna make 16 cap holy, right? So I'm gonna refer him or her to appropriate chaplain. This is how we here to serve in the interfaith. And I always tell people that, hey, I'm not here for a Thai Buddhist soldier. I'm here for everybody. Like a doctor, for example. If the patient with the breathing arm walk to you, you're not gonna ask, are you a Buddhist or are you a Muslim or are you a whatever, right? I'm gonna stop the breathing first. If I cannot fix it, I'm gonna refer him or her to a specialist able to take care of that. So this is how the military work. So that's why I really like this profession to be in the army. And like I said, I connect to my soldier. Like I said, your first name is right here, and your last name U.S. Army. So that's why I'm able to relate you. You are brother, sister, no matter where you come from. So that's how I make friends and make the relationship with my soldier from different culture, country, and the different friends. Thank you.
I grew up in a military family, so I was drawn to the military. I also, like Chaplain Cole, had a family member who underwent some pretty serious health concerns and issues when he was serving in the military, and it was, we had support from local parish, but it was really a military chaplain who was able to provide both him and our extended family the support that we needed to move forward. So lots of other examples too, but the examples of other chaplains drew me into the chaplain corps. Talked about interfaith. You've seen it already. I mean, we've all had experiences. I had one when I was out on the border in Iraq, on the Iranian border, and serving with the Iraqi army, and their commander asked me to stay and be their imam. And I've always remembered that because after spending time with him and the relationship that we were able to build, he wasn't asking me to be something that I wasn't. They had no religious leader out there, but there was a mutual respect, I guess, across religions, and he knew that there were ways that we can support each other across faiths.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We're going to watch our last clip here, thinking about chaplains as the moral voice of the military. McNair. Chaplain McNair is a native of High Point, North Carolina. She graduated from Livingston College with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration and a minor in Political Science. As with the first, I like emphasizing this because it shows you kind of what you can be a major in anything too. She completed her Master's in Divinity, MDiv, and was ordained in 2013 at Evans Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and endorsed through the World Council of Independent Christian Churches. In 2014, she completed a residency in clinical pastoral education in Tallahassee, Florida, and she writes that this experience transformed her skills in navigating and addressing matters of diverse spiritual, mental, and emotional issues. In 2015, she served as a youth pastor in her local community. She has served on active duty for 4 years before she transitioned from Sergeant Williams to Second Lieutenant, commissioned through Chaplain Candidate Program, and in 2017, she was assessed as a chaplain. Presently, Chaplain McNair is assigned as the Accessions Officer in the Department of the Army, Chief of Chaplains, Personnel Office. Prior to her current active duty assignment, she served 6 years in the United States Army Reserves. Chaplain McNair, please share with us an overview of your vocational journey.
I can tell I'm tired because I couldn't cut the microphone on. So when you were reading that, I said, wow, it's a lot on how God, brings you through life and how you arrive to where God wants you to be. And just a brief point of how I got to the point of where I was is coming from a family of a lot of success, church family of a lot of success, doctors, lawyers, judges, even the advisor to Nelson Mandela was in our service. That was not their plan for me, was to join the military. When I said I wanted to join the military, I was already in. And so my aunt and everybody was, rallying together to try to get me to not be in the military anymore because the plan was for me to go to law school. And that was what we discussed as a family. So that was where I was supposed to be, was to do corporate law. So when I changed the plan, I had a lot of questions from every angle of the family and the church family of, why are you making this decision? Because you could have done X, Y, and Z. And I say all that to say is that you can't be anyone but who God has called you to be. And so they didn't understand it then, but they understand it now. I didn't have anyone in my family really that was in the military. I am the only one that has served this long, the only one that's an officer in the military. So I've done things a lot differently than what my parents did and what my family decided for us to do. And we come from a very close-knit community. If I go home, I'm like a little mini celebrity. So, it's just a very close community. So the transition into the military was sort of seamless, because you go from one community to another community where you're looking out for each other. You're looking out for your battle buddy. You are ensuring that they're doing the right thing. And it's a little bit of pressure, right, where you make this decision and you better not fail, because if you do, then, they're going to talk about you. And so when I went to seminary, and then when I was in CPE, it transformed a lot of my thinking of how I would minister to those that were different from me, that grew up differently than me. And so it really helped me minister to those in our formations. And for the interfaith aspect of it, I was like, what did I do? Because you just do things and you don't really ponder on what you've done. But I have a dear friend of mine. He is Muslim, and so we were talking, and he was like, yeah, I'm having an issue with getting a chapel because one of the chapels was switching their times, and he was like, I'm really getting frustrated because I really want to have my service. I said, oh, no problem. I'm the senior pastor at the gospel service, so you can use my chapel. He was taken aback. He was like, you gonna let me use your chapel? I said, absolutely. We will figure out a time where you can have your service, and we figured it out, and he was able to have service right after my service, and my members, when we would have meetings, we would, during the block of his service, we would just have meetings in the sanctuary while he's having service in the back. So we worked that out where he was able to minister to the Muslim soldiers, because we all have a responsibility to ensure that we are meeting the religious needs of soldiers and families, and regulation dictates that, where 165-1, that is our regulation that dictates that we must take care and accommodate the religious needs of our soldiers and our families. But that is it. I mean, that's it and that's all. And so I'm just glad to be here. And one thing about it, I'm going to end it here, is I love loving on God's people, and seeing how God even transforms the lives of our soldiers who are lost, and then you see that transformation once you minister them and you are standing beside them, even with commanders where, you shouldn't have a problem with speaking truth to power. You want to tell them, look, sir, ma'am, that's not going to work. And this is why it may not work. And so those are some things that I have found to be such an amazing experience to wear this cross.
So there's just a couple, I'm going to offer a few questions, but I'm going to leave, so just about 5 minutes. So maybe not everyone needs to respond, but 2 questions to toss out would just be, has your faith or religious life changed in any way because of the interfaith, the interaction with other world religions? And what do you think the rest of us could learn from the interfaith or interreligious context of the U.S. military? So what could we learn, and has it had any impact on your own faith?
For me, ma'am, I always tell people that, I compare religion like food, okay? The food of mind, and the food that we eat, that the food of to nurture our body. And I always tell people that you don't have to change your nationality to be Mexican to eat burrito. You don't have to change your nationality to be Japanese to eat sushi, okay? So whatever work for you, and you open mind, okay? Open mind. Because if you said, okay, I'm gonna eat hamburger, you're gonna eat your hamburger for the rest of your life, right? So open mind is kind of allow you to explore what right for you. You're able to explore, and this kind of like the diversity is take place. And again, what I share in non-religious setting, like in the army, like I was a former Buddhist monk. What I can share on the table, so I lead mindfulness. With it, I'm not talking about Jesus or Buddha, And also, I'm from Thailand, so I use Muay Thai. So also, I do yoga. So I lead mindfulness Muay Thai yoga PT for my soldier every Monday, which is aligned with the military H2F. What does that mean? The first one is the 5 principles: physical readiness, mental readiness, spiritual readiness, nutrition, and sleep. So what we call the holistic health readiness. So that's why I bring my profession, in my experience, like mindfulness in Buddhist tradition, which I don't talk about Buddha, but again, something that relate to everybody life, even though in the army or even though in the civil life as well. So that's what I share in the army.
I have Chaplain Cole.
Yeah, before I give my answer, I'm curious, how many of you here are veterans? Yeah, excellent. Thank you for your service. And how many of you here are here because you're getting extra credit in class because you signed in? God bless you. Thank you for coming, okay? I think I would answer it this way, that we execute the commander's religious plan. And that means that everybody has the right to exercise their faith. And we have a prior commander over here. To the extent that that soldier who is Buddhist or Muslim can exercise their faith, I have the right to exercise mine. So the First Amendment is paramount, and the commander is giving charge to the chaplains to ensure that that happens. Also, what we haven't talked a whole lot about tonight that I would just emphasize as well is it's about the warfighter. And so the Army values different dimensions of the human being, one of which is a spiritual dimension. And so the Army says that a warfighter who is spiritually healthy is a better fighter, can accomplish the mission. Chaplains are charged with ensuring that under the commander, the force is healthy to include spiritual care, because that will accomplish the mission. That will accomplish the task of building a better warfighter. That slide up there says soul care and interfaith relations. The assumption there is that we have a soul. The Army is in charging us with soldiers' care, and they, in their regulation, has built in the fact that they believe that a soldier has a soul. And so we are exercising under the commander's charge, the commander's master religious plan is what it's called, soldier care, to build a more capable and ultimately a healthier warfighter, that when they come back from war, they will be healthier. We have a motto within our state, within our chaplain corps, that as we have soldiers deploying, we have soldiers all over the world right now, the motto is this: I am ready to deploy and give my life, and if necessary, take life without losing my soul. If we can have a soldier believe that and own that statement themselves and be spiritually healthy, they will be a more capable warfighter. So I just want to emphasize that as well tonight. Okay, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. We have some people to run mics too, but I was thinking we could open it. I have more questions always, but let's turn to the, let's turn instead to audience questions. So we're going to give up 2 of our mics here. This is Rabbi Bruce Cadden in the Religion Department.
If I could add a historical note of interest. During the Civil War, Congress passed a law to engage military chaplains, but they had to be of the Christian faith. One particular regiment actually hired a Jew to lead as a chaplain, and when word got out, they were forced to dismiss that person. Eventually, Jewish leaders met with President Lincoln. He agreed to the justice of their cause, and Congress amended the law to open the chaplaincy to non-Christian religious leaders. So thus, today we have rabbis, Buddhist priests, imams, and others in the ministry.
Would it be possible to start as a chaplain like today? This is very inspiring for me.
So on behalf of the Washington Army National Guard, let's talk afterward, okay?
What?
on behalf of the Washington Army National Guard, let's talk afterward. We have, in
Okay.
Washington, we have 18 chaplains.
I will be able to start today.
Okay, we only have
that's my
14 right now,
question.
so let's talk afterward, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sure all of you have had some experience ministering to soldiers suffering from PTSD. I'd be interested in hearing about that and what you learned from that aspect of your service, your ministry.
Well, I've done various clinical experience in the hospital where I did CPE, the clinical pastoral education. And so what I've learned through that is, one, I am a chaplain, not a psychologist, so I try not to tiptoe in that aspect. However, in dealing with PTSD, you are dealing with trauma. And so when dealing with trauma and identifying what caused the trauma in the first place, and being able to sit and listen to what happened, how it affected them, and also how does it affect those that are around them. And understanding that what we see, what we experience, it all has an impact to the brain and to the mind. And if we dismiss that, then we don't identify the fact that we're human and that we do have a response to what happens to us. I remember one time, I'll share briefly, is I was dealing with a group of individuals with PTSD and other mental issues. And so what I did was I told them, I said, hey, I need you to draw for me your favorite fruit. And so they drew their favorite fruit, and then each fruit, what does it have? It has seeds in it, right? And so I told them every seed that you drew is a seed that's a part of you. So every time we talk, every time we pray, every time we sit in this room, there's a seed that's identified, and you're able to grow and develop from that seed. And so when we did that, it helped a lot of individuals understand, one, what they're dealing with is normal, that the impact and that trauma they experience is normal. And the Army has done a better job of realizing that PTSD is a thing. PTSD is something that we have to deal with. There are people that are really suffering with that thing called PTSD. There are some with minor issues. There are some with some very severe issues of PTSD, and I hope that makes sense. But again, being able to identify it, and when you identify the system, one thing that I did do is there's a book with the DSM. You ever heard of the DSMV, the psychological book that, I try to know the triggers, know the signs. So then once I identify the signs, then I'm able to tell my partners who are in the medical field that, hey, this guy, this gal, they're showing these symptoms and you may need to talk with them. So I hope I answered your question.
Hello, my name is Josiah. Something you said that stood out to me that was also kind of, if I understood it correctly, which was part of a big reason why I came here, is the idea of helping people come to peace with their own soul when going out to kill other people. And I guess, so you said that part of what they kind of have to come to terms with is that they're ready to give their own life and to possibly take a life and not lose their soul, which I can imagine is a nearly impossible task, but something that, of course, is a reality, right? And I guess, is it actually impossible? And if it isn't impossible, how do you do that? In my mind, even for people that don't necessarily believe in the reason that they're going to fight, but are trying to afford college or something like that, right? So even removing the idea of just warfare, but just that they're there for like even a financial reason. How do you help someone come to terms with the idea of losing their soul over killing someone?
I think you just said it's an impossible task. And I think to some degree it is. Well, maybe it just that it is. We heard earlier in the afternoon, Dr. Trelstead mentioned Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who decided to try to, he said, there comes a time when I'm not just going to bandage what's under that wheel of injustice, but drive a spoke into it. And for him, that was killing, or at least attempting, right, to kill Hitler. And some may say, well, that's very easily justifiable. And there are other times when taking somebody else's life seems less justifiable. And I think for me, justifying it in any way, shape, or form for myself or for the soldier isn't helpful. Maybe for others it is. But understanding that all of us are part of systems that are much bigger than we are, and in some ways we try to influence and change those systems for a more just society, a more just world. Sometimes we can't. But owning that none of our hands are fully clean. So I remember coming into the Army, there was a local pastor from my tradition who was like, how are you doing this, and how can you justify doing what you're doing? And I never had a good response for him. And I came back from deployment, and he found me, and he said, in my parish, a lot of people work for Lockheed Martin, and they're very generous donors. And my livelihood comes from their being a part of this congregation. And so I thought that I was doing right and keeping my hands clean. But the truth is that none of our hands are clean. And so I think it's owning that, again, this might not be an answer that some people like, but that in a way, none of us, we're all implicated in some way, shape, or form for some things. Some of us can distance ourselves from it more, and others of us, again, in a word from my tradition, sin boldly, knowing that sometimes there's it's not the choice between right and wrong, but Lord have mercy, and how then do we move forward?
That's just a fabulous answer. Thank you very much for engaging us honestly and in complexity and with passion. And thank you all for coming and for joining us this evening. We'll send us off here at 8:15. You're free to, I think that there's some snacks and things out there to get that, continue talking. We don't have to leave the room immediately or anything like that. But thank you for coming, and safe travels home. Thank you. Thank you.